that when Jesus says there are only two great commandments, and on all of them, on these two rather, hang all of the law and the prophets, he's saying to us, this takes priority, to love God and to love our neighbor. And then again, as John records it, that this is my new commandment. You love everybody, right? Love each other. And so much so is this priority. In other words, it's first among firsts. It's like it's the chief command. It's the chief thing that we ought to do as followers of Jesus. And I remember several years ago coming across this concept that 13 times in the New Testament, this exact phrase exists: love one another. 13 times. Now there are two additional ones that say love for one another. So 15 times you could say, this is like priority, right? What we ought to be known by.
You just heard the voice of Reverend Daniel Humbert, the senior pastor at Trietsch Memorial United Methodist Church right here in Flower Mound, Texas. Welcome to the Life Plus God podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Robinson, and today we're covering the question, how is Christian love different? And when I say different, I mean, I guess you could say different from worldly love, different from the way love is defined in our culture, the way that we express love socially. But as someone who was born and raised in the Christian faith, when I first thought about this question, I was like, well, that's a silly question. We all have the same definition of what it is to love somebody. But as I've grown older in life and I've made friends with people who maybe didn't come from loving homes or maybe even came from abusive environments, and they're trying to figure out, what does it mean to be loved? I don't know what that looks like. And so I think that this is a helpful conversation for all of us to dig into, because I think that as Christ followers, we say, we want to emulate this Christ love that we learn about. But it's hard and it doesn't come naturally to a lot of us. So Daniel, I'm really happy that you've made a career out of talking about God's love. So I hope that you can help guide us through this conversation that on the surface might seem kind of easy, but when you really start to dig in, this love is difficult.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. I mean, before we started recording, you said, oh, it ought to be easy. And I said, well, maybe not. And I think, love can seem easy, but I don't believe it's easy. I believe it's complicated, and I believe it's hard, and I believe it is a basis for our faith, but it doesn't mean it's easy.
Mm-mm. So I think I'd like to start with the Bible.
Oh, wow.
Because
okay, let's do that.
I want to know, how does the Bible define love? The very first thing that pops into my head is 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, where it's very clear cut and tells us, hey, this is what love is. So how is love defined in the Bible? And we probably will refer to that scripture.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And has that definition of love evolved over the grand arc of Scripture, or has it always been that?
Yeah, I believe it's changed a little bit. I think one could argue it's a bit of semantics, but I'm going to start with the biblical languages first, Hebrew from the Old Testament and Greek with the New Testament, and talk about the words for love, and then talk a little bit more about the definition.
Thank you, yeah.
So the Hebrews and the Greeks, man, they were better at this than we are. They had multiple words for love. So when you look at the Hebrew text, for instance, going back as far as Genesis and all, like through the Psalms and all that other stuff, they had three different words for love. One was ahava, which was the most common and probably highly similar to our generic word for love. It talked about different kinds of love, like romantic love or familial love or friendship love. Ahava was just kind of a generic form of love, but it talked about the different contexts for love. And then there was the word dodim, which was kind of the expressions of love. Was it desire, or was it emotional, or was it feeling love, right? And then the word from the Hebrew that is the most common for the New Testament, but was out of the Hebrew, the original language, was hesed. And hesed was this, it really was of God and from God. And the most common place that we get that is in Psalm 136. I mean, it's throughout the Psalms, but Psalm 136 has this description of God's love that is unfailing. God's unfailing love never ends. And there's this antiphon. It goes over and over again. Every single verse has it. And that's Hesed. And Hesed is this rich sense of compassion and self-giving and derived, if you will, the Hebrews believe, from God. And it wasn't naturally human, but humans could take it on. And so it's from that we begin to get a better sense in the Greek New Testament. So the Greeks had 4 words for love, some of which were similar, and some of which we know, right? One is eros, from which we get erotic, right? And that's a kind of romantic love or sort of the love that connects people in ways that are intimate, right? And then there's philia love, like Philadelphia, brotherly love, love for humanity. And then there's orge, which is a sense of family love. This is the way I love my mom or my dad or my brother or my sister. I think I said orge. It's storge. I'm sorry, not orge, storge. And then, of course, agape. And agape is the love that Paul talks about, that Jesus talks about, that some of the letter writers in the New Testament talk about. That's the love that we want to sort of emulate from God. The agape love is self-sacrificial. It's unconditional. It's a love that goes beyond self and says, I want to be there for you and for others. I want to do this in a way that is other-centered. And that's what we're striving for in the Christian context. And that's what Paul's writing about in 1 Corinthians 13, for instance. And so since you brought it up, I'll describe it a little bit. He expresses a sense in which love is beyond all things. He talks about if I prophesy or if I make loud noises or if I do other things, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. In other words, love is ultimate. And then his description looks something like this. Love is patient, love is kind. It's not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. It doesn't keep records of wrong. It doesn't rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And then he encapsulates that at the very end of the chapter by saying, faith and hope and love, these 3 things are great. But the greatest of these, Paul would say, is love. And so part of what we begin to glean there is this.
And he's using the word agape in that Greek?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for highlighting that. Yes, so in that letter, he uses the word agape throughout. I think there's one exception in that chapter where he uses philia, but otherwise it's agape. And this is the love that Christians are supposed to emulate. And part of what you hear in all that, of course, is, man, this love, this agape love, is not about what I get out of it, what I feel from it, how it makes me sort of act or behave, but rather what I do with it, what I do about it. It's very other-centered.
Mm. I really wish that we had different words for love.
I do too.
Because when you were talking about the different describers, I was like, well, yeah, I love my mom and I love tacos.
Right.
And why am I using the same word for both of those things? So with the different ideas of love, is the thought that as Christians, this agape love that we're trying to emulate, it should replace eros and philia and the other ones, or it goes with it?
Yeah, it shouldn't replace it because we are human, right? So we're going to have human love and we're going to have desires and we're going to have connections with other humans. So no, it's not so much designed to replace those forms of love, but sort of supersede, right? Like there's a sense of hierarchy to it. In other words, it's great to have a romantic relationship. It's great to have friendships and that kind of filial love. It's certainly good to have familial love, right? We want to love our siblings and our parents and things like that. So there's nothing wrong with any of those forms of love. They're all perfectly natural, normal, and good. But Paul and Jesus would both say that agape love supersedes all those, that it takes precedence over those. To the degree, for instance, Jesus says, if you don't hate your mother and your father more than you hate the gospel, you're not following the gospel. And boy, that's strong language, right? That's not using the word love, but it's the context of we've got to love the way God loves us and love Jesus more than familial love, or more than sibling love, or more than friendly love, right? That it has a kind of a hierarchy.
Mm. I think an exercise that was really helpful to me that I did, man, when I was really struggling with my relationship with God, was that since I knew that love in 1 Corinthians 13 was agape love, which means this is God's love. This is what God's love looks like. I replaced the word love with God as a reminder of who God is. So God is patient. God is kind. God does not envy or boast.
That's clever. Yeah,
all
that's
of these
great.
things. And it helped me recenter, when I'm angry at God or when I feel like God is being unfair, it helps me remember, I don't think that that's the way God works.
Yeah. And that's great because, number one, kudos, because I know that's a hard place to be, right?
I can't take credit. That was Doug Scott, my therapist.
Well, there you go. We're thankful for somebody like that, right?
Yeah.
But it's also, again, from Scripture, the way God is described and in some cases defined. God is love. Several places in Scripture, in the New Testament at least, say that. And so if God is love, and our job as followers of Jesus, God's child, is to follow after that, then we are to love that way, right?
Yeah. So with that in mind, what would you say to people? Because I know this is an age-old statement or argument that the God of the New Testament is different than the God of the Old Testament. And people arguing, we don't see God as patient and kind and all of these things in the Old Testament. We see the God of wrath and the God of revenge and retribution. And so what words would you have for people who are struggling with that, what they see as a dichotomy?
Yeah. Clearly there are images of the God you just described from the Old Testament. I don't think any of us would argue that. But I would also say that, and I'll just put a number that I have no backing to, but maybe 5 times as much or perhaps even 10 times as much, there are descriptions of the God who is love and the God who loves us and the God who provides for us and the God who is present for us. And one only needs to read the Psalms, for instance, to see that what I call the human tension and human struggle with the realities of life and how there's just bad stuff that happens that was often attributed to God by Old Testament writers, and therefore we sense this wrathful God or a merciless God or vengeful God. I happen to believe most of that's not about God proper. It's about somebody's rendering of how God operates or how God interfaces, right? But many more times in the Old Testament, there are descriptions of God and actions by God that are love, that are pure, unadulterated ways of caring and demonstrating mercy and justice and compassion that are practical forms of love.
Hmm. So when we're looking at this definition of love from 1 Corinthians, how does that guide how we as Christians are supposed to love others? Because it's one of those easier said than done things.
Absolutely. That's why this is hard.
So
Yeah.
this idea of like, hey, this is what God's love looked like. And you said our goal is to emulate that and to take that on board. What does that look like in our day-to-day living?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is I prefer to use the word this is a description of love rather than a definition of love, because I don't see this as a definition. I see it as a description, because for me personally, I find it hard to define love more than we can kind of describe its behavior, its attitude, whatever. So when it says, for instance, love is patient, by golly, how can I be patient with somebody who's not doing what I want or not acting in the rapid way I'd like them to, like off of a stop sign or a traffic signal, right? Love offers patience in that. Or a child who is not demonstrating what I've asked them to do. What does discipline in love look like via patience, right? Second one is love is kind. How can I be kind to somebody who clearly isn't kind to me or to other people and so you begin to see very quickly, even on what I call superficial level, patience and kindness, how hard this becomes.
I was knocked out right
right?
away.
It starts right off the bat and then doesn't insist on its own way. Wow. So what does that look like in a conversation with family members who don't have the same political opinion as us, or a work colleague who doesn't operate under the same values that I operate under, right? This is where love is, it's very straightforward, right? There's a clear set of sort of behaviors and patterns, and yet all of them are hard. I mean, I don't find any of these easy because I'm rude and I can be arrogant and I've been boastful and I can clearly be irritable. One of them is love is not irritable. You've witnessed me be
I think I've witnessed you in this room be irritable. No, it is. It's really difficult. And I mean, it's a good reminder, but it's just constant practice and every day getting it wrong. And how do you keep from getting discouraged?
Well, I don't know that I have a good answer for that, but for me, the way I work on that is remind myself, okay, Humbert, you kind of messed that up. So how can you do better next time? And so I ask that question. So there's a bit of confession. You screwed that up. You messed that up. You didn't do that right. How can I do that better? There's a pause. There's a reflection. There's a, what's the next step?
Yeah. Is there an element in 1 Corinthians that says love is willing to apologize?
It doesn't say that, but it's embedded, in my opinion, in some of those things, right? Not boastful or arrogant, because arrogance wouldn't apologize.
Yeah.
But the opposite of that arrogance seems to me might be apologizing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about love, I think that when we read that description, it feels very cut and dry of like, okay, this is what love is. But we get it, as we mentioned, we get it wrong all the time. And the church, the big church has gotten it wrong so many times. And I'm wondering if you can think of some ways that maybe we as a church, as a people, have misinterpreted how to love historically and today.
Yeah. So I think what I call the human condition, which is basically our sinful nature, right? Our humanity. This agape love is unconditional. That is to say, it comes without conditions. And in our humanness, we are very conditional. You need to act this way. You need to do these things. You need to be like this, right? And so we put all kinds of conditions on it. And to me, one of the most common ones over the decades and perhaps over the centuries, I don't really know because I'm old but not that old, is in the life of the church, Big C Church, we have often sort of emulated this kind of a concept. You are welcome in the life of the church and we want you to be here. Parenthetically, once you get your life together and everything's just as it should be, right? Whereas Jesus would say, come on, I just want to be in a relationship with you. I just want to love you, right? And there are those who would say, well, Jesus does love us, but certainly Jesus wants us to change our behavior or, stop doing that.
Well, it's the whole repent theology.
Yeah.
Have we gotten that wrong in some way in terms of love?
I believe we have. Because Jesus never once said, I will love you when you get your poo together, or any other sort of, emulation of that concept. That is to say, he didn't say, I want to heal you, I want to offer you help, I want to teach you, I want to touch you, quite literally, but I want you to be right first. It was in his loving, I believe, by the doing, right, by the healing or the caring or whatever, that it was in that loving that people changed. It was in and through that loving that people said, man, maybe there is something not quite right, or maybe there is something in my life that's not working, or maybe there's some part of me that really is broken. And I'm grateful that this guy, Jesus, has loved me no matter what. And now I kind of want to work on something, whatever that is, right? I don't know, but over and over again in the Gospels, we see where Jesus wants to be with people, help people, care for people, demonstrate compassion and mercy and empathy and justice for people. And then they felt a desire to be in a relationship with him. So the church has gotten that backwards often, not always, but often. And I think that's where we mess up.
Well, and I think that we talk a big game, but like you said, even if we say, "Come on in, we love you as you are," do we really mean it? Are
Right.
we acting like we actually love you as you are, or will we love you after you change your ways, after you change your lifestyle,
Right.
after you aren't addicted anymore, or
Right.
whatever it may be?
Right. And Jesus, or the scriptures tell us that we love because God first loved us. In other words, God loved us, that is, say, followers of Jesus. God loved us when we were sinners, because we're still sinners, right?
Mhm.
God loved us even when we didn't have our stuff together. God loved us even before we understood what that love was. And that's the way we're supposed to love. Here's what I think has sort of caused this dilemma in the church and certainly perhaps in the world. The gospel writer of John also wrote a couple of letters in the New Testament, and I highly recommend those 3 letters because they talk a lot about this love. And at one point, the first letter of John says in the 4th chapter, perfect love, and this is perfect love here, agape love, God's love, perfect love casts out fear. Because fear is all about rules, it says, and laws. And we can't love like God until we cast out that fear. And guess what? A part of our human condition is I'm fearful of your difference, whatever your difference is. And it's that fear that prevents me from fully loving you because I don't understand you, or I don't understand what you're doing, or I don't understand these circumstances. And so my human fear causes me to metaphorically put my hand out and go, wait, I need to figure you out, or I need you to figure yourself out before I can love you. That's human love. Agape love says, I'm going to love you, and sort of live into these descriptions that Paul describes. I'm going to love you even before I understand you, or this thing, whatever it is, this difference makes sense to me. And that's not humanly normal, right? Because we're fearful.
Yeah. So looking at that worldly love, understanding of love, that we're limited to sometimes by our humanity, what are some, I guess, I don't know if red flags is the right word, but like, what do you look out for in the world to be like, oh, this is not the love that I was taught from Jesus, even if someone's proclaiming to be doing things out of love?
Yeah. Well, the first one is what I just talked about, fear. If
Yeah.
I am fearful, if I'm operating out of fear, then I have started living back into my human love, not God's love. The second, I think, is related, but it's different, and that is when I lack empathy or compassion, when it seems to be diminishing, because that's, in my opinion, that's the sort of epitome of Paul's description, is a sense of empathy and compassion for the other. And so if that's being minimized or literally even lacking, then I know I'm reverting. And then more broadly, I would say when I'm sort of becoming selfish and really just kind of, hey, what's this mean to me, and what's in it for me, and how am I going to benefit from this? That's a real indicator that I'm not into God's love.
Yeah. I'm interested to get your perspective. I was in a Bible study last week where we were actually talking about Wesley's 3 simple rules.
Mhm.
And so that week we're talking about do all the good that you can, or
Do
was
only
it
good.
do only good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rule number 2.
And we were talking about what that means in terms of love and empathy. And we had a really good conversation. Someone brought up the phrase unchecked empathy in a negative way, of like, we as Christians have a tendency to give so much empathy and grace in an unchecked manner that it can cause harm to other people.
Yeah.
When you're allowing someone to continue on a disastrous path that has a ripple effect of harm in the community. where does stuff like that factor in to this unconditional love, and what is our role
Yeah.
as Christ? Because I think that when I think of ways that we as a big church have misinterpreted this idea of love, I think a lot of the term of like, well, we got to hold people accountable, that sort of attitude and mentality. But where there's so much complexity and gray area, like where is the line between loving someone and enabling someone?
Yeah, and that's a great question, number one, and I forget about this phrase, unchecked empathy, and I think there's great value in it. And I make the highest degree of correlation with addictive behaviors. Many know that our own son is in recovery from addiction, and it was the hardest thing as a parent to step out of unchecked empathy, right? Because we love our child and we want the best for our child, and we want to make sure that he doesn't stumble or cause harm to himself or others. And so in the addiction, what happens with unchecked empathy is we pretty much let him do whatever he wants. We don't have any form of boundary. We don't call him to accountability for certain kinds of behaviors like, either stealing or, lapsing in ways that he might interface with other people in ways that can be harmful. And so a part of what you have to do is understand boundaries are not a bad thing, and they don't abdicate love.
So boundaries are not the same as conditions.
Correct. Boundaries help identify that we have to have clarity about who we are individually and separately. And so the boundaries say things like, I'm going to talk to you about the way your addiction impacts me. And I'm going to share with you what that means to me. And I just need for us to have a real conversation about what that looks like. I need you to hear how it impacts me, or how it impacts your child, or how it impacts your spouse, or whatever. Or I need for you to know that I will not tolerate your stealing. And our son never stole from us, but it's a frequent condition for addicts is to steal, right? Because they need to take care of their habit. And so there's nothing unloving, and I maintain unkind, about saying, I'm no longer going to tolerate that. I'm no longer going to tolerate you stealing money from me. Or I'm no longer going to tolerate you taking some of our spoons, which is stealing, taking some of our spoons so you can cook your stuff, right? I find that to be loving and actually kind, because what I'm saying is I love you enough that I don't want to enable your habit. To me, that's kind. Mm-hmm. It's not saying you're a dirty son of a gun and why are you doing this? And I guess there's a way, I believe, that you can be kind and loving and gracious and say no, or you can be loving, kind, and gracious and maintain boundaries without setting, because those boundaries are about a relationship that already exists. Whereas the conditions we talk about, having an unconditional love, is really, in my opinion, about how I'm going to engage the relationship, and I'm not going to put conditions on that. I'm not going to put conditions on the way in which I start to engage a relationship with you. Mm-hmm. That's how I look at it.
So conditional love is, I will love you when you do this, and boundaries is, I love you, and these are the boundaries we need to put in place to have a positive relationship.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
That's helpful. Are there any examples of that in Scripture that you can think of off the top of your head, of that setting boundaries to love better?
Wow, good question. Wow.
Sorry, I didn't prepare you for that one.
Yeah. I don't. Let's keep going, and I will feel as though I can sort of identify that. I mean, to me, that might be things like, and I'm really only guessing on this, is when Jesus sends out the 70 to go sort of evangelize and share. He gives them real clear instructions about Here's what you ought to do. And when stuff happens where if they don't receive you, just walk on. Just shake the dust off your feet and move on. In other words, don't force yourself and don't browbeat and don't Bible thump. None of those were Jesus' words, but I mean, Jesus was basically saying, here's a boundary. If people don't want to hear you, if people don't want to receive this, don't condemn them, don't harm them, don't force anything, just walk away. Paul would also reiterate that concept with a different phraseology. To me, that's a little bit about what that is.
Yeah. I also think of Jesus often stepping away to be in prayer or to have some alone time. And it's not, it's a good example for me of a healthy boundary of some people might perceive that as selfish.
Yeah.
Of like, really, like we're doing this whole thing and you want to go sit off by yourself for an hour and all these people want to talk to you, you know?
Yeah.
But he needed that to be able to better love and care for people. He needed that alone time.
That's correct. Another one that just came to my mind because it's very similar to that analogy, and that's the story of Mary and Martha, where Jesus comes to their home and they both welcome him, but Martha sort of gets all busy with doing the right thing, offering hospitality, but she gets distracted by the hospitality. And the concept here is not that we shouldn't offer hospitality, not that we shouldn't, kind of have a clean house or whatever, but that she got distracted by it and she couldn't be in relationship with Jesus. Whereas Mary kind of literally sat at his feet and listened to him and absorbed what he had to do. And the concept there was that there are boundaries with Jesus, right? And it is, don't get distracted by other stuff. Rather, give your attention here. Give your attention to this love, really. And it is, by the way, Jesus highlighted what are called the two great commandments, right? Love God and love neighbor. And then in John's gospel, he literally says, I give you a new commandment that you love other people the way I have loved you. And he didn't put conditions on it. Love people if they agree with you. Love people if they look like you. Love people if they have the same values as you. Love people if they have, He didn't put any conditions on it. He just said love people.
In your ministry, can you think of a story where someone's life was transformed by experiencing Christian love when maybe in the past that's not the love they had come encounter with?
Yeah, I think back to my time at Argyle. I mean, every church I've served, I believe there are good examples of this. But one of the most powerful for me personally was a couple who came into the life of the church. To be honest, I don't remember how they came into the life of the church, but they came into the life of the church at a time in their lives when they were under stress. She was Jewish, he was Catholic, and he was dying of AIDS. This was in the mid to late 1990s, and there was still a bit of a stigma about all that. And so our church had created an AIDS care team through an AIDS services organization in Denton. And so we would go to Denton, and some folks were in the Argyle area as well. And these folks had not joined the church. They just kind of started coming. And so we started offering care and aid to the husband. And Joni had never been in a Christian church before. She really just... I shouldn't say never, but it was very rare. And over time, they started coming more, started to participate, and her life was transformed by people who had previously been strangers in her life, these people on the AIDS care team, to the degree that, she not only started coming to church, but she started wanting to figure out what is this love that you're demonstrating and why are you demonstrating it and how does this have value for other people. And she became tremendously involved in the life of the church and became a leader on several different avenues, not informal leadership, but with several different things in the life of the church. And to this day, she still is a part of that church. And she still practices her Judaism, but she has this, you might call her a Messianic Jew. She does not use that language. But she believes in Jesus and she believes in his saving power and she follows his teachings, but she still practices the Jewish holidays and her life was just radically transformed in a way that
She
came.
sounds a lot like Jesus.
Well, yeah. That
He
came,
wasn't a Christian either.
yeah, right. That came from some followers of Jesus who decided they wanted to love some people that they had previously never met and wanted to demonstrate care and kindness and compassion and help provide tangible acts of love.
Yeah. I think that that's one of the things that can be confusing for people who encounter Christian love we get it wrong all the time, but when we get it right, it changes things.
That's right.
And
Absolutely.
It's unlike any group or organization or community that I've been a part of, because there are a lot of communities that are really good at taking care of each other, like amazing at taking care of each other. But to go out and help the stranger and to welcome in people who are different from you and to serve people who are different from you. And this is not exclusively Christian. There are
Right.
many faith traditions that are all about, but I believe all of those faith traditions also come from God.
Yeah.
And, but I had, when I was in college, I was president of the Wesley Foundation, and so I was there all the time. Like if I wasn't studying, I was at the Wesley House, putting on programs, doing Bible studies, just hanging out on the couches.
Right,
It was like
right.
where we all spent our
Yeah.
time. And there was a young woman there who came to everything. And but she was atheist, and she wasn't interested in converting, and nobody was trying to convert her. She was just a friend who
Right.
liked coming to everything. And one time I asked her, I was like, "Hey, Emily, I'm not judging you or anything. I'm just curious. Like, you are a proclaimed outspoken atheist, and yet you are one of the most involved people in this organization. And I just want to know, like, why? I'm so happy you're here, but I want to know why. Why
Right.
is it?" And she said, "I don't know." She was like, "I'm just loved here." And I carry that with me, because I'm like, it's just such a beautiful, and that was it. And we moved on, and she continued to serve and continued to be in relationship. And nobody was trying to get her, "Oh, you got to pray that salvation prayer. You got to, say these words. We got to get her baptized." Nobody was trying to do any of that. It was just loving her and being her friend, and she wanted to be there.
Right. And I think that just emulates this whole concept that when Jesus says there are only two great commandments, and on all of them, on these two rather, hang all of the law and the prophets, he's saying to us this takes priority, to love God and to love our neighbor. And then again, as John records it, that this is my new commandment. You love everybody, right? Love each other. And so much so is this priority. In other words, it's first among firsts. It's like, it's the chief command. It's the chief thing that we ought to do as followers of Jesus. And I remember several years ago coming across this concept that 13 times in the New Testament, this exact phrase exists: love one another. 13 times. Now there are two additional ones that say love for one another. So 15 times you could say, this is like priority, right? It's what we ought to be known by.
So we're struggling to get this love thing right amongst the people that we say we love. What about our enemies? What about the people that we disagree with? What about the people that you mentioned that it's, you disagree on politics, you disagree on everything, values, whatever it is, it does not line up. How do we take this transformative love to the people that we struggle to be in the same room with sometimes?
Yeah. Well, again, it's hard, number one, right? It's not humanly natural. And so that's why we need the help of God and Jesus, I believe, and the power of the Holy Spirit, and why we can then use these qualities that Paul highlights in 1 Corinthians 13, because even when we disagree with somebody, or we call them our enemy. An enemy is a very broad term, right? I mean, it could be somebody who's literally trying to kill us or sort of, get rid of a race or ethnicity. to we just don't agree, right? I mean, it's everything in between.
Or what you might call a personality conflict.
Yeah, right.
That's our workplace word for it, is personality conflicts.
Right. And so clearly, I hope we would all agree that with the sort of far end of the one spectrum where someone's either trying to kill you or get rid of your whole race, genocide or something. Clearly, that's hard to deal with, right? It's hard to process or enter into conversation or relationship with. But Jesus didn't say don't. And the first 3 centuries of followers of Jesus after his death and resurrection literally did die facing those kinds of folks, facing those kinds of enemies. And I do think it's a genuine question to ask ourselves some, 1,700 years after all of that. Why don't we still do that? Why don't we still, instead of taking up war with the people who are clearly our physical enemies, why not face them and make attempts to breach the chasm or to reconcile the difference? Now, I'm not going to be first in line, but I do have to ask that question of myself from time to time. On the other hand, with folks where it's much less dangerous or much less conflictive, it's just a difference of opinion, whether political or otherwise, I can do everything that Paul identifies in 1 Corinthians 13 in the way I engage with that person, to not be arrogant, to not be rude, to not be unkind, right? And so those are ways to do that. And then Jesus himself says, and I am very challenged by this and clearly do not do it all the time, but when I do it, it does amazing things. Jesus says, pray for your enemy. Wow. So if I pray for my enemy, what it does is help me in terms of how I understand that person, how I understand what God thinks of that person, and in turn, that begins to change how I relate with that person. And I think that's why Jesus said that. I think he said, love your enemy and pray for them. He knew what it would do. He knew how it would change the person following his teachings and how they would engage with that person.
Yeah. So with the facing of your enemies, I think that we're conflict is exhausting, right? And it's really hard when you're in a non-dangerous situation and you're just having, a tiff with somebody, it's really hard to come to the table, and we are conflict avoidant.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want to, it takes everything out of you, especially when the other person is not going to play fair.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to.
Yeah. Well, and so I think this is where boundaries come back in.
Yeah.
Because I would maintain, it does depend on the nature of the relationship about whether or not you do want to enter into that kind of a dialogue, right? In other words, if this is a work colleague that we clearly have a working relationship, but we don't really necessarily have a friendship, does that mean I have to engage, and we have different political views, let's just use that as the example. Do I have to necessarily enter into a conversation that is kind and gracious and loving and empathic and all that kind of stuff about politics? No. That's a boundary that I'm going to keep for myself that says we can do our work stuff together. We might could even socialize together, but we're not going to broach the subject of politics because that's a boundary I'm going to. And see, that's not a condition, that's a boundary. On the other hand, as you may know, and certainly I know in my own family, golly, there are family members where we've got these huge differences and we clearly love each other, right? And so then we have to make decisions about what and how are we going to enter into these conversations? And can we do it kindly and graciously? Can we do it without being arrogant, right? So those are all about boundary setting, I think.
How do boundaries feed in to what feels like the opposite of boundaries, which is sacrificial love? The sacrificial love that Jesus put on display for us. Are there boundaries in sacrificial love?
Absolutely.
And what do we mean by sacrificial love in the terms of like how we live that out as humans?
Yeah. So for me, a very obvious one is if I'm in an abusive relationship where somebody is abusing me emotionally, physically, sexually, whatever, I do not have to stay in that relationship. I do not have to sacrifice myself for that relationship. So we understand that. On the other hand, if I'm in a relationship that is challenging or difficult or whatever, then a part of sacrificial there is how do I engage the relationship in such a way that I'm not always just thinking about myself and my way of being or my way of doing? How can I engage that relationship that I might offer to the other something, whatever that is, kindness or generosity or something, right? That's the part of sacrificial we're talking about. Jesus sacrificed his life for others because he's the Son of God, right? I mean, he did that in a way that caused others to look and say, what are ways I can emulate that in my humanity? Because part of our faith tradition says Jesus wasn't just human, he was also God. I'm not God, you're not God, so we're not going to have the same capacity as Jesus. But what is it in our mortality that we can do that gives up self toward others? Mm-hmm. And it can be very simple stuff, just like cleaning the table after somebody when it's not really your job. Or it can be really in depth, like giving up some part of your, compensation or some part of something that was yours that you would offer to somebody else just as a kind gesture, whatever that might be, mm-hmm. right? That's a part of what that sacrifice looks like.
Yeah. Sometimes I struggle with this idea of sacrificial love because as a woman, sacrifice is expected of you. Mm. And it starts to feel like a condition of love, of like you deserve love when you have sacrificed everything for your family and put everyone before yourself. And I feel like we do a huge disservice to women. And I don't know how to reconcile in my mind, like this godly version of sacrificial love and this cultural version of sacrificial love that is put upon people.
Yeah. Well, and I hear that and have witnessed it many times. For me personally, the way I make the distinction is it's really only agape sacrificial love when you freely and willingly want to do it, not when it's put upon you or expected of you. And that can be a nuanced difference, right? But that's the end goal here, is that it's a freely and willingly offered, not forced or expected.
What advice would you give to someone who's struggling to show Christian love or even receive Christian love in a world that often values self-interest, instant gratification over everything else?
Yeah. Well, this is where I put in a little plug for the church, right? I think Christian community helps in that regard. That is, say, when I get involved in a small group, whether it's Bible study, life group, or whatever, where I can both share my struggles with it and in a safe environment where I can express, golly, I don't understand this stuff, or it doesn't make sense, or how do you do this? And others can do the same. And then at the same time, they can demonstrate, at least the hope is, they can demonstrate some tangible acts of those loves. Mm-hmm. So Christian community is critical to all that. And it's why I say you don't have to go to a church to be a follower of Jesus. That's not a requirement. But by golly, it sure helps, mm-hmm. or it can help. I guess a better way to say that, it can help. The other is, golly, read the New Testament and engage with what it is Jesus says about this love and what it is Paul says about this love, and begin to wonder, how could I do that? How could I live this out? How could this be real, right? Mm-hmm. And then every once in a while, try it. Try to do it, right? Try to act on that understanding.
Yeah. It makes me think, I grew up an athlete, and You can work out on your own. You can go for a jog. You can, do all of these things, but it's not nearly as inspiring or motivating as when you have a team of
Right.
people who are doing this with you. You
Right.
have a workout buddy. You
Yep.
have people checking in on you and looking forward to seeing you.
Right.
And if you didn't show up to practice, they wonder where you were,
Yep. Same
and it
concept.
makes it completely different.
Yep.
And it rather than feeling like a chore of, oh man, I have to go work out today, and you're doing it all on your own, it can feel like an uplifting experience of, I get to go spend time with my team today.
Right. Absolutely. Exactly. Great observation.
So looking at the church today, and it could be this church or just looking at the broader church, I feel like Christians often get a bad rap for the ways that we don't exude God's love more so than being acknowledged for the ways that we do. And I understand it. It's a snappier headline to call out the ways that churches are messing up and the way that we're not loving well and mismanaging funds or whatever it is that doesn't look like love. But can we just take a moment to highlight, like, what are some of the ways that you see the church successfully living out that agape love in the world today?
Well, sort of go generic first and then get a little more specific. I mean, one is when we serve others without any expectation of return. And return in this case can be anything from you giving me back something to expecting that you'll come to our church because we've served you, right? That's one way. Another is to simply be humble in the ways in which we interface with people. We don't always have to be right. We don't always have to have the answer. We don't always have to, do everything just so. I think humility is a sort of tangential component of love, and it demonstrates love in a very nuanced kind of way. Another way is sharing power, whether that's with sections of society who don't normally have power, or whether it's just acknowledging again that we don't necessarily have all the answers and acknowledging that we can share that. So those are some sort of generic concepts. Some more specific ones that our church does is, and one of them's new. We adopted a new elementary school to kind of offer some care. And so we are adopting classrooms where we're helping the teacher and coming alongside the teacher and offering tangible help, whether it's for parties or school supplies or things in the classroom that could be of benefit. We're mentoring children on a one-to-one basis through communities in school. We went Friday, for instance, to this school for the first time and offered a lunch to the teachers. That campus had never had that happen for them. And we just did it because we love them. We love what they do. We love the influence they have in children and families' lives. We love the impact they have on society by educating kids in a free educational system. And then the first day of school, we went back to that same campus and about 25, 30 folks and just did what I call a rah-rah parade for the kids to say, yay, we're back to school and let's have some fun. And we're so glad you're here. And we we're excited for you. And just had a big sort of party, if you will, for those kids. We don't know any of those kids. We've never had any relationship with those kids, right? But we want to generate relationships with those kids. So those are some tangible ways that you just demonstrate love.
Yeah, when I think of the big church around the world, when there's a world disaster, we know how to mobilize and provide disaster relief, whether it be through donations or people actually showing up with a bucket and putting in work. And I think that is just pure agape love of like when you see a need and you act on it right there in that moment without stopping to think, what am I going to get out of it? Or what does this mean for me? Or then this isn't really going to work for my schedule.
Yeah. Or what do you believe? And what are your values? Mm-hmm. And are you aligned with us? And should we be helping you? Right. I mean, none of those are questions that are asked. Right. It's one of the reasons I love, among many, United Methodism, because as you well know, our UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief, across the globe, whenever there's a natural disaster, we are always no later than second, only behind the Red Cross, on boots on the ground, helping people out and helping them to get their lives back together.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there are a lot of positive things coming out of the church, and we all get to be a part of it, which is just amazing. As a reminder, sometimes I get marred down in the negativity. And just that reminder of like, you're a part of a movement of love.
Right.
Every single day that you step into this building, you get to be a part of a movement of love.
Right.
And there's no better place to be.
Absolutely.
There's no better place to be.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the other things I think is a huge side benefit of love is that I believe when we love well, like Jesus calls us to do, we literally offer hope to people. I mean, just imagine if you didn't feel loved, whoever you were, or whatever your circumstance, if you didn't feel loved, you really don't have much hope. Whereas if you feel loved, somebody loves you, somebody cares about you, somebody demonstrates compassion and empathy for you, you got hope. Yeah. And man, what a cool deal. So
to wrap us up, if someone's listening who is new to Christianity or just exploring the faith, or let's be honest, if you're an old hat and you're still trying to figure it out like me, how would you describe the experience of giving and receiving this agape love? What is that? What should that feel like?
Like nothing else can compare to it in the most positive of ways. It's very hard to describe, and certainly, as I mentioned, to define. But I think I would just say that the difference is agape love is all about how I can help you know that you are worthy and valuable and made in the image of God, no matter who you are. Whereas human love, I believe, is sort of conditioned on how does that make me feel and how does it help me in relationship to you? Mm-hmm. Human love, I hate to say it, is a little selfish.
Yeah. How do you make me feel about me?
Right, right. And unfortunately, it's what leads to turmoil in relationships and breakups in relationships, because there's this sense of, well, what's in it for me? And if you can't help me out, I don't really want to be here. Right? So.
All right. Well, I think that this has been a really good crash course in in love. And I mean crash course because, Daniel, I mean, how many years have you been doing this?
Too long.
Preaching about love every Sunday for 30 years at this point, yeah. And you haven't run out of things to talk about. So, yeah, if you are interested in learning more about love, it goes a lot further than this 1-hour podcast episode. Indeed. So come on down, join us at Trietsch and give it a try. Check us out at tmumc.org.
All right.
The Life Plus God podcast is hosted, written, and produced by me, Alyssa Robinson, and sponsored by Trietsch Memorial United Methodist Church in Flower Mound, Texas. Check out Trietsch online at tmumc.org or in person to see if this church is a right fit for you and your family. We'd love for you to visit us soon. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and rate us on your podcast platform to help other people find our content. Join us next week and let's keep growing in relationship with Christ together.